So I'm immensely proud and humbled at the same time to be able to chair this third roundtable on governance and institutions. It's a great honor because we have three amazing panelists. We have Marta Janczarski, whom I will present just a bit later. She will start the roundtable. We will have Sebastian Hallensleben, and we will have finally Christine List. And just before giving the passing the baton to Marta, I just want to put some elements on the table. This third round table is all about the role of the institutions in the governance of AI and through standards. And it brings us to basically one of the probably the main challenge that will be needs to be addressed today, and one of the main reasons for which we have such an event, which is the current shift of the governance of technologies and specifically AI, which is moving from regulation by the laws to the regulations by standards and all the questions that it raises. One of those being will be addressed, for example, by Christine, being the actual price of those standards, which if they are a part of the common legislative body, need or might need to be free of access, and all those questions are being asked before the courts. All those questions are being asked, of course, by academics, and this will be also a topic of the discussions today. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Marta Janczarski, who is the National Standards Officer at Microsoft Ireland. She's based in Dublin, and she has been a leader in AI standards since 2016, and she has participated in a number of international standards. She was the project leader for the development of ISO IEC 42001, which is, as you may or might not know, probably the most important standard in the AI space currently. It's about the management of AI systems. And she is currently, which is even more important, the convener of ISO IEC GTC 1 SC42 AI Working Group 1, which is all about foundational standards. Marta has professional experience in both public and private sectors. She has worked and collaborated in a multinational setting with vast diversity of stakeholders. She has lived and worked in a number of countries. She has a diploma from the Institute of Directors, as well as a graduate degree in genomics from the University of Edinburgh. So thank you, Marta, for being here, and please, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for being here. Hopefully I'm coming through all right. I do apologize. I'm quite under the weather at the moment, but we will make this work. Unfortunately, for some reason, my slides aren't sharing, but while I keep trying, I'm going to start the presentation just so we don't keep everybody waiting. But yes, once again, thank you for having me. It's definitely a great topic, a good cross section to be diving into this. I will be looking at this and my remarks are definitely from the perspective of the work that I'm doing within SC42, in particular as a convener of Working Group 1. I'd like to spend a bit of time just to give some context of what that means and what that lens looks like for the purpose of this discussion today. So as a working group convener, it's in my scope to be helping to facilitate and mediate the development of standards and projects that are assigned to that working group. So within the SC42 committee, which is the committee where both ISO and IEC come together to develop international standards, and they're divided by scopes across different working groups. And so for me, it's foundational standards. And I understand that term is quite broad, but to give a bit more flavor of what types of projects I would be able to have within that portfolio, it's all the sort of standards and documents and discussions that you really would like to have in place to us, like basically have the assurance of the maturity of the domain of the topic. So these include projects such as documents of terminology, concepts, risk management, governance, the ISO IC management system standard, impact assessments, and then also a few of the supporting documents towards certification against a standard. So the auditor requirements for being able to audit against the AI management system standard. We also have guidance documents, so guidance for the implementation of ISO IC 4001. We're looking at also incident reporting as sort of an upcoming project. So that just gives you a bit of a top idea of the types of topics that we have experts from the 46 countries participating, and it is a diverse matrix. So each country puts together their representation of experts, whether that's industry, academia, regulator, and government. Ideally, obviously, a mix of all, along with civil society, and those experts that take a priority interest in the foundational standards projects are the ones that I will see joining our meetings, writing those contributions, getting involved in discussions, helping with editorial language. I don't mean to underestimate the amount of effort that actually it takes to make sure that these documents are written in a clear language that works internationally, that is translatable into a number of different languages, but is also clear in the understanding of what its meaning is in a number of different settings. So these are the types of things that we focus on in our development, and where we have experts that have a particular area of focus that will participate and engage in. We do also, particularly from a working group one perspective, do a lot of outreach and work with other working groups, but also other committees. We obviously have participation in liaisons to SC42 at that level, but we will see those liaisons provide input into working group one on those projects. So most recently, we've had, for example, participation from OECD on looking at some of their documents and the relationship that we have that we could possibly work on within Working Group 1 scope. And in the past, we've also had a exchange with ITUT on terminology and some of the documents that they're developing. We've also had a good relationship with some of the joint working groups. So these are working groups that will join experts from two committees, from two backgrounds. So for example, health informatics and AI, they have their own joint working group, and they have their own work program of projects. But there's a relationship for us there because they, of course, are also looking at terminology. They're also looking at governance. And so we try our best to do that type of collaboration, exchange of information as we develop those documents in our respective areas, because inevitably there's going to be that bridge when those documents get implemented. So from our perspective, because we are looking at foundational standards, we have to continuously juggle the responsibility to make these as interoperable of an application as possible. And fundamentally, for them to operate internationally across the different types of stakeholder groups. So it is a very almost sometimes impossible ask. And of course, it's our best result is only as good as the diversity, both of countries, but of stakeholders that participate on these documents. But we need to be able to have a certain level of assurance that these documents can work in a variety of different settings. And while, yes, obviously there's a immense lens and immense pressure on a purely legislative ask, it isn't in our mandate to serve just that one request, because we have a number of asks of ISO standards. And specifically from a legal perspective, we see ISO standards being foundational to procurement contracts. particularly in a supply chain setting where you have third-party responsibilities and liabilities that need to be very well defined. And being able to have reference to a common document, such as an ISO-IC document, is paramount in being able to have those types of structures in place. Furthermore, on a sort of next level of order, magnitude of order, when we look at trade law and we look at trade agreements, the way that we look at implementation there, again, having the ability to reference common terminology, but also something as pragmatic as common certifications and mutual recognitions, this becomes where these types of documents are quite useful because of their representative of an international perspective. So we do have a mandate for a number of different applications, and we need to find a way to balance these documents to have a common denominator for a number of different applications. And so, of course, this provides its own challenges, and it's sort of the idea of, best served ideally by all, but we need to keep that balance in mind when we're developing them. And we've seen that occur. We've seen some of the standards that have already been published from Working Group 1 by the predecessor convener. We've seen these documents being used in the examples that I've mentioned, where they do form a legal basis. It's just a legal basis for those particular types of applications, not necessarily legislative, which while they may form a part of that relationship and part of that chain of towards compliance or towards regulatory law, I really want to stress to make sure that when we're looking at the application of ISO-IEC standards, and particularly the projects that are being published in Working Group 1, that we are making sure that we're keeping in perspective all the different asks of those documents that our stakeholders are making of those types of documents. So Tom did a great job of mentioning ISO-IC 4001, the AI management system standard. I do think that is definitely the most prominent one. It's the first standard that you can certify against for AI, for governance, to ascertain the quality of the development and deployment of AI systems. It's something that is very familiar to a number of stakeholders because it uses a template that is very common of an MSS. So it is interoperable with 9001, is interoperable with MSSs that are in vertical standards. For those that are familiar with either Transport Canada or Health Canada's regulatory structures, you'll note that the incorporation by reference to management system standards is very well established within the Canadian regulatory structure. And so this is definitely a piece of the puzzle that can be used alongside a number of other guidance documents. And just like we have with Health Canada, actually you can go online, there's a website for listing all the ISO and IEC standards that are incorporated by reference. This can give you a flavor of how those guidance standards are also used, even if they're not certifiable against. So this kind of just a bit of a nugget of how some of these documents may down the line show up. I think I'll pause for now, Tom. And I'm just looking at the time, making sure that everyone gets their due space. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Marta. This has been great, and it's great to have you here. Sorry, you are under the weather. We are now going to pass the floor to Sebastian Hallensleben. This is great to have you with us, Sebastian. So Dr. Sebastian Hallensleben is the chair of CEN-CENELEC GTC 21, where European AI standards to underpin EU regulation are being developed, and co-chairs the AI risk and accountability work at OECD. Sebastian is the initiator and program chair of the Digital Trust Convention and is principal advisor Digital Trust at KI Park. As Chief Trust Officer at Rizaro, he works towards drilling down to ground truths about capabilities of AI systems. And he will talk about the special role of GTC 21 in shaping the harmonized standard in Europe as well, and will give us a broader look at the emerging AI standardization ecosystem. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the invitation and for the introduction. I'll just share my screen to show a few slides. You should be able to see my screen. Hopefully you're seeing the right presentation mode. So diving straight in, I'd like to indeed start with the European ecosystem, but also broaden the view a little bit. And it's very fortunate that the two preceding Martas, Marta Janczarski has already given quite a good insight into JTC1 SE42 for AI standardization at the international level. And I think she was too modest to mention that she's actually been the lead for developing the 42001. And Marta Ziozzi has already covered quite a bit of ground in terms of participation and inclusion and the challenges of making sure that all stakeholders are involved. So this picture is really just a quick reminder where we are in the overall picture. So we're now talking about the European layer, kind of the middle layer of the global three-tier standardization landscape. And we do have a very special situation in Europe in that there is not only a standardization committee, CEN-CENELEC JTC21, but there is also a special regulation, a special relationship to regulation. And this is a special relationship that follows a format that is not new at all. This is not AI specific, but has been around for 40 years, even though it is still being called the new legislative framework. So how does that relationship work? First of all, the new legislative framework defines a sort of division of labor between standardization and regulation. So standardization outlines at a high level the essential requirements that need to be met for protecting public interests, for achieving certain results, or for dealing with certain hazards. Regulation does not cover how to do so. By contrast, or complementarily, standards do exactly that. They detail technical solution or a technical path that's suitable for meeting these essential requirements outlined in regulation. Important to note here is that these standards are voluntary, so you're free to ignore it and just follow the legal text. However, the burden is then upon you to prove that what you are doing is indeed satisfying these essential requirements. Whereas if you choose to follow harmonized standards instead, you're automatically assumed to be compliant with regulation. So this presumption of conformity is the big reason why harmonized standards play a big role. Given this setup, the European Commission doesn't really want to leave it to chance whether there are harmonized standards for the AI Act or not. And so a standardization request has been issued by the Commission to CEN-CENELEC and to some extent ETSI to build harmonized standards for the high-risk requirements in the AI Act. And you can see the list of 10 items there. So most of the work, the vast majority of the work that we're doing in JTC21 is in response to this standardization request. So if we look at implementing the request or responding to the request, we can kind of show it like this. So here you see the request items as black and white boxes, and you see a number of colored boxes that are being developed in response to those items. You can see a number of yellow and orange boxes. Those are standards that are created from scratch, pretty much from scratch, in JTC 21 because the requirements on standards in Europe were too different from what was available internationally. And the green boxes are mostly international standards that we build on or that we reference and rely on. There are also further green boxes not shown here where we've directly adopted international standards, for example, for taxonomy or terminology rather. So you can, for example, see at the right here, we have standardization request item 9, quality management. So there's a European standard AI quality management system for regulatory purposes, given that we are specifically supporting the AI Act. But it does reference the ISO IEC 42001. It also references a few other international standards in smaller ways. And this is kind of trying to achieve a best of both worlds approach, in that we do need to reflect European specificities, but on the other hand, we don't want to reinvent the wheel for content that is already there internationally. A, because we haven't got the resources and the time, it would be a waste of expert attention. And B, because the divergence between international and European standards landscapes should be as small as possible in order to make life easier for globally operating companies. Without diving too deep into the 42001, I'll skip that slide because Marta's already covered it. Just to say that JTC 21 is the largest technical committee that has ever been up and running in Europe. We've got around 200 experts directly at the European level. And if we count the mirror committees in 25 countries, there are somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 experts at national levels contributing to the overall effort, which also to some extent explains why this is a very complex effort where it is not easy to make very rapid progress, even though we do have deadlines and are under considerable pressure to deliver. Quick mention also of the code of practice. The code of practice refers to generative AI, to general purpose models. And here the AI Act prescribes a different approach, a much shorter approach, where the Commission or the AI Office leads a short 6 to 9 month process to come up with a code of practice in a methodology that is different from the standardization methodology. However, the code of practice that is near publication now, I think the final consultations are being integrated, is expected to flow into a standardization request. So eventually it'll probably become a standard too, or something similar will become a standard. So we could ask the question, okay, we've got the AI Act, we've got regulation, we've got the harmonized standards coming out of JTC 21. Do we need anything else to have a European AI standardization ecosystem? And the answer is yes, we do, because the AI Act and consequently harmonized standards only tell you about compliance. They say, well, this AI system is compliant and satisfies certain your regulatory requirements. It doesn't really say whether your AI system is competitive in the market. It doesn't give you a way of telling the market or telling prospective clients that your AI system is better in some sense than the competition's AI system. However, what the AI Act does have is an extension mechanism, the so-called Code of Conduct, according to Article 95, not to be confused with the Code of Practice. And this Codes of Conduct mechanism allows adding further frameworks or recognizing further frameworks that could then cover aspects of competitiveness and allow the comparison of the qualities and the performance of different AI systems. And there are a number of frameworks out there. There is also an effort to merge these frameworks with the working title AI Trust Alliance. That's driven by Positive AI and previously Confiance AI in France, VDE in Germany, and as well as IEEE. And there are quite a few organizations involved in these discussions. But there is also a more frontier effort that is needed if we look beyond AI governance frameworks. If you buy a car, you don't just want to know that it's safe. You also want to know, well, what's the maximum speed? What is the stopping distance? How many stars did it get in its crash rating? What's the fuel economy, and so on. So you want performance metrics in order to decide which car is right for you. For AI, we don't really have very good performance metrics. The metrics we have are quite low level. For example, for LLMs, there are a gazillion benchmarks, but they don't really tell you, for example, how good a chatbot is or whether chatbot A is better than chatbot B and how to measure that. So there is an effort underway currently, and I'm briefly putting up on the Rosaro Chief Trust Officer hat to pull together coalitions of the willing as a first step towards standardization to build such metrics that ultimately give a way of answering the question, well, when is an AI solution good enough to go live, or which one of several AI solutions is better in a given scenario? This is really context specific. So with that, with the AI Act, with harmonized standards, and with efforts to create ways of measuring performance and to achieve competitiveness, are we done? Yeah, not quite. I showed this earlier earlier, and you could ask the question, well, there's obviously this nice interplay between regulation and standardization at the European level. What about the international level? There are ISO/IC standards, there are also IEEE standards, there are frameworks such as the NIST RMF that have international recognition. Is there any corresponding piece of regulation at the international level? And the answer is there kind of is, and we need to look to the OECD for this, specifically to the due diligence guidelines for responsible business conduct. So these guidelines are already out. They have been around for 10 years, 12 years, something like that. And currently, they cover basics like don't use child labor, don't mess up the environment, don't bribe local officials, and so on. And these guidelines do have an enforcement mechanism in participating countries, so they have teeth. So what we're doing in the OECD right now is to basically add a chapter with some basic high-level requirements on AI governance. And we're really copying the European approach rather than creating and prescribing in detail what AI governance should look like. We are just formulating a high-level approach and then point to potential standards and frameworks that could be used to implement those high-level requirements. And you can see a few well-known friends here, the NIST RMF, ISO 31000. You could also list the 42001 there, IEEE 7000, IEC Guide 51, and so on. So we have a AI governance ecosystem at multiple levels. Does that mean everything is under control? Is there anything else needed? Well, I'm asking the question in a way that makes you understand, well, yes, there probably is. And I can only tease that for reasons of time today, but we do believe that in addition to the AI governance ecosystem, we need a digital trust ecosystem. And this is simply because with governance, there are two big communities you cannot reach. Firstly, it's very hard to reach the open source community, regardless of what regulations and standards you put in place for AI governance. And secondly, and even more importantly, you do not reach bad actors. Bad actors are bad actors by definition because they ignore regulation. And even the most beautiful laws and the most beautiful standards will not help with bad actors flooding the digital space with fakes, with bots, and making their money through fraud and deception. So we need to look more broadly at how to make the digital space resilient against the misuse of AI, which will allow us to limit regulation to where it really is needed. As I said, that's a whole topic for a different discussion. I cannot resist mentioning the main event there, which was held for the first time at OECD in Paris in November last year. But this year, in early November, it's going to be held in Canada at Mila in Montreal. And so I thought it's worth mentioning that in this workshop. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for this presentation. This has been absolutely great. I will directly pass the floor to Christine List, our VP of Legal at the Standards Council of Canada, because I want to keep time for the questions. I'm sure we'll have many of those. So I will very shortly present Christine. So Christine List serves as the Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary at the Standards Council of Canada. She joined SCC in March 2020, bringing over 20 years of public sector legal experience. Prior to her current role, Christine worked at the Royal Canadian Mint, where she was responsible for corporate governance and spent over a decade at the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, where she served as legal counsel and corporate secretary. She holds a Bachelor of Social Science with honors in political science and a law degree, programme de common law en français, from the University of Ottawa. Christine has been a member of the Law Society of Ontario since 2003. So Christine, I will pass the floor to you now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Tom, for the introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. Today, I will be discussing how standards can be used as a governance tool by governments, the interaction between standards and legislation, and SCC's perspective on the current legal situation, including recent significant court decisions. But first, I think a few words on the role of SCC would be well placed. So SCC is a Canadian Federal Crown Corporation established by a Standards Council of Canada Act. This means that we're a creature of statute and that our mandate is outlined in legislation. And part of this mandate is to promote efficient and effective voluntary standardization in Canada, in particular to promote public-private sector cooperation in relation to voluntary standardization in Canada. Important to note, we do not develop standards. However, we do have the legislative power to accredit standards development organizations. We also accredit conformity assessment bodies to ensure they comply with national and international standards for their respective activities. And a bit about interaction of standards and legislation. Standards often become part of the legal corpus when they're referenced in laws and regulations. This interaction ensures the requirements set by standards are enforceable and legally binding. And by using standards, governments can also lower the cost of creating and enforcing rules, since the industries involved help cover some of the costs. As well, it means that when standards are updated, the regulations don't necessarily need to be. This public-private partnership provides efficiency and harmonization, allowing businesses to develop and pay for the rules they need, which creates efficiency for industry and reduces rulemaking costs for regulators. So a few differences between standards and regulations. And while standards are an effective regulatory tool, they differ from regulations in key respects. Regulations are developed by political mandate and authority, while standards are developed by a balanced matrix of volunteer experts that have an interest, experience, and expertise in the requirements. Generally, these volunteers work towards consensus through the international recognized standards development process. Regulations, in Canada at least, are based on public consultation, impact analysis, and parliamentary scrutiny and ultimately approval. But they are not based on consensus. Rather, they're based on rulemaking decisions made by an authority having jurisdiction. And the unique characteristics of standards, that they reflect consensus and that they're written and maintained by and for their users, constitute their value in the rulemaking arena. Now, there is cooperation between regulators and the Standards Development Organization, and this constitutes a public-private partnership that provides efficiency and harmonization. Technical committee experts volunteer their time to develop standards, creating significant value. And according to SCC's 2023 member survey, in Canada, these volunteer contributions are estimated to be worth approximately $36 million. Standards development organizations administer the development process and in most cases sell the commercial rights to use the standards. The value volunteer expertise plus the retail value of the standards allows standards development organizations to be financially sustainable. When a standard is used in regulation, the rulemaking cost is shared across the parties who develop and purchase the standards. And the standards are developed through a balanced process that ensures that all voices, the industry, government, civil society, and others are represented and heard. The system allows businesses to develop and pay for the rules they need, which creates efficiency for industry and reduces rulemaking costs for regulators. Now, there is also a reciprocal value added to the standardization system when regulators reference standards and regulations. Obviously, it creates a demand for a standard, which in turn helps standards development organizations recover some of the costs and maintain their standards catalogs. When the standards and conformity assessment programs are harmonized across multiple jurisdictions, they contribute to efficient trade of goods. The WTO Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement requires that WTO members, including Canada, use international standards where possible to realize trade benefits. Some of our research at SCC has demonstrated that 93% of world trade involves some level of conformity assessment to standards. This partnership between regulators and standards development organizations is well established and a fundamental component of the rulemaking ecosystem in Canada and also around the world. Now, that being said, there are also some challenges being faced in standardization. So you can see through what I've said so far that the standardization regulatory balance is a delicate symbiotic relationship. However, there have been some disruptors recently, and those have brought about certain challenges that create risks for the sustainability of the standardization system. And I'll talk about two recent court decisions, one in Europe and one in the United States. So last year, in a significant ruling, the European Court of Justice determined that harmonized standards referenced in EU law must be freely accessible to the public. The case involved a request for access to 4 standards, which the European Commission had denied access to, citing commercial and copyright protections. However, the court found that these standards, once published in the official journal of the European Union, become part of EU law and must be accessible to ensure legal clarity and to uphold the rule of law. The court emphasized that regulation number 1049/2001 supports a broad public access to EU documents, which with exceptions only when commercial interests are at serious risk, unless outweighed by public interest. It also concluded that the need for transparency, legal certainty, and democratic accountability overrides the Commission's concerns. So this decision challenges the traditional funding model of standards development organizations, which may now need to explore alternative ways to support their work. Similarly, last summer in the United States Court of Appeal for the Fifth Circuit ruled in favor of PS Knight Company Limited, stating that once model codes or standards are enacted into law, they become the law and can be reproduced and also distributed. So this case actually has quite a long history. It goes back to the 1980s, where Mr. Knight, Knight's father, actually, it starts over 2 generations here. Mr. Knight's father decided that he was going to publish the Canadian Electrical Code. Obviously, the Canadian Standards Association, CSA, which, by the way, is also an accredited standards development organization accredited by SCC and holds over 3,000 copyright registrations to voluntary standards. Obviously, they were not going to let this pass, and there were lots of discussions with Mr. Knight, many legal actions in Canada, where the copyright of the Standards Development Organization was upheld. Now, then Mr. Knight's son decided that if it's no longer viable in Canada, I will move to the United States. He moved company and everything to the United States and started to commercialize the Canadian Electrical Code under the name Knight's Canadian Electrical Code in the state of Texas. CSA once again tried to assert their copyrights, and given that they had infringed on 7 of its model codes, initially the district court in Western District of Texas ruled in favor of CSA and issued a permanent injunction against the defendants. Obviously, Mr. Knight, not happy, appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court, which reversed the decision and dismissed CSA's copyright infringement claim. The appellate court found that once model codes are enacted into law, they become public domain and are not subject to copyright protection. So you can see the challenge developing here. We've set the scene, the relationship between regulation and standards, as well as some recent case law. So the challenge is there. And the European decision has led to additional actions by organizations such as public.resource.org and the Right to Know against the European Commission. It increased the risks and impacts to standards development organizations. The CSA versus PS Knight decision creates a scenario where any standard incorporated into any regulation in any jurisdiction could potentially be commercialized in the US, bringing significant concerns to standards development organizations and undermining the sustainability and the integrity of the standardization system. So these decisions have eroded SDO copyright for standards and regulations. If this trend were to continue and expand, and standards development organizations were no longer able to sell commercial rights to standards incorporated in regulation, they would not be able to recover the cost of developing them. At a minimum, this would disrupt the standards development system and result in hampered coordination between regulators and standards development organizations. The portion of rulemaking costs that are borne by standards development organizations would be transferred back to regulators and ultimately taxpayers. The loss of this volunteer rulemaking infrastructure could disrupt regulatory systems and limit the ability of regulators to use important international standards which facilitate domestic and international trade. So what is SCC's perspective, and are there potential solutions? So SCC recognizes the importance of making standards accessible to everyone, including businesses, regulators, general public. However, we also understand the challenge faced by SDOs in maintaining the quality and the integrity of standards without adequate funding. And SCC advocates for a balanced approach that ensures both accessibility and sustainability. In light of the challenges faced by the standardization system, one potential solution is the development of a tiered access model, where basic access to standards is provided for free, while more detailed and specialized content is available for a fee. And I know that certain SDOs internationally and also nationally here in Canada are exploring these various options. Another approach could be to explore public-private partnerships to fund the development and dissemination of certain standards. And the AI industry can benefit significantly from such models. For instance, AI developers and researchers often require access to standards for their work. And by providing tiered access, these professionals can obtain the necessary standards to ensure their technologies comply with regulations and best practices. Public-private partnerships can also facilitate the development of AI-specific standards, ensuring that AI technologies are safe, reliable, ethically sound. Now, in Canada, at least, the recent challenges have highlighted the need to adapt the legislative system so that standardization system maintains its sustainability. There is a need for a clear and balanced legal definition of accessible. Accessible means many things to many different people. You need to clarify the expectation of SDOs and regulators and prevent erosion of the standardization of standards development system. Furthermore, explicit legislative protections for SDO copyright would allow them to expand access to standards and regulation while securing their business models and operations. Further discussions, we think, are also required regarding the funding of the development of certain standards deemed essential to a sector or industry that cannot absorb the cost. A shared funding approach has been successfully implemented for the national building codes in Canada. And finally, the issue of standards as governance regulatory tools is a complex and multifaceted one. It requires careful consideration of the interests of all parties, and SCC is committed to working collaboratively with all of them to find a solution that promotes transparency, accessibility, and sustainability. I mean, it's no secret that the AI industry is rapidly evolving. Standards play a crucial role in guiding its development. By integrating AI-specific standards into the regulatory framework, we can ensure that these technologies are developed responsibly and ethically. This collaboration between regulators, standards development organizations, and the AI industry will help create a sustainable and transparent ecosystem for AI innovation. So on that note, thank you very much for having me this afternoon, and I look forward to any questions and also to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. This has been great, and it's all the advantage and the greatness of an event such as the one we're having today is the diversity of the perspectives we have, not only from sharing different consortia, but also this corporate point of view that you just brought. So that's very, very appreciated. Thank you again for being here today.